Welcome to this explainer. Let's just jump right in. Today, we're diving deep into the massive footprint of the home builders industry. We're going to look at exactly how the developers responsible for building out our neighborhoods measure their true environmental impact, how they manage some pretty massive risks, and how they plan for a rapidly changing future using the rigorous SASB framework. Let's get into it.
To do that, here's our roadmap. We'll kick things off with the home builder's landscape, then move into land and community impact, workforce health and safety, designing for efficiency, and finally, adapting to climate change.
All right, Section 1, the home builder's landscape. So the home building market is kind of a tale of two extremes. On one hand, you've got a heavily fragmented market made up of countless privately held developers of all shapes and sizes. But on the other side of the spectrum, you have these publicly listed entities operating on a completely different, highly integrated scale. I mean, while a local private developer might just build a handful of homes a year, these publicly listed giants are constructing entire communities. Their financial and environmental footprint is absolutely massive, which is exactly why they require standardized metrics to track what they're doing.
Now, you might be wondering, what are they actually building? Well, the industry's primary focus is overwhelmingly on sprawling, single-family residential communities. Those vast neighborhoods expanding out into the suburbs. But there are also smaller, denser segments making up the rest of the market. We're talking townhomes, condominiums, multifamily housing, and mixed-use developments that might put your home right next to your office or a grocery store.
But regardless of the developer's size, whether they're building a sprawling single-family mansion or a tight mixed-use condo, the life cycle generally follows four distinct steps. You have land acquisition, site preparation, home construction, and finally home sales. And every single one of these stages presents its own unique sustainability and financial risks.
Which brings us to Section 2, land and community impact.
Developing on completely untouched land, so-called greenfields, causes some pretty major ecosystem disruption. So smart growth actually focuses on redeveloping existing sites. Developers track three critical types of land to prove they're minimizing harm. First, gray fields, where at least 50% of the surface is already paved. Second, brown fields, which might actually contain hazardous substances that need cleanup. And third, infill sites, which are basically vacant lots already hooked up to existing infrastructure like roads and power. Redevelopment here is a total game changer because it avoids steep regulatory hurdles and keeps pristine land untouched.
But location isn't just about the land itself, it's about the resources underneath it. Developers have to actively track how many lots they're delivering in regions with high or extremely high baseline water stress. And the why here is simple and honestly highly financial. Ignoring water scarcity risks leads to severe permitting delays, friction with local communities, and ultimately a long-term depreciation of the home's value.
Moving right along to Section 3, workforce health and safety.
Site excavation and construction are literally incredibly demanding physical jobs. So, to avoid costly delays, insurance spikes, and obviously bad PR, developers track what's called their TIRR, or Total Recordable Incident Rate. This basically standardizes injury reporting by calculating incidents against 200,000 hours worked. Why that specific number? Well, it perfectly represents 100 full-time workers putting in standard hours for an entire year. So it creates a clean, easily comparable baseline across the whole industry.
But here's where this gets really interesting. The home building industry relies heavily on a subcontracted workforce. So if they were measuring safety only for direct, on-payroll corporate employees, that would be a massive loophole. To fix that, the standards rigorously require tracking safety for both direct employees and all contract labor on site. It ensures a culture of safety that protects absolutely everyone wearing a hard hat, regardless of whose name is at the top of their paycheck.
All right, Section 4, designing for efficiency.
Let's look at a pretty fascinating metric, the percentage of installed water fixtures, think shower heads, toilets, and irrigation controllers, that are actually certified to a water efficiency standard. When builders install these, it's a win-win. They alleviate stress on local water supplies, which helps them secure permitting, while simultaneously lowering your long-term monthly utility bills as a homeowner. That immediate savings drives serious market demand. And to capture that market demand, builders often aim for holistic third-party green building standards. We're talking LEED for homes, the National Green Building Standard, or Environments for Living Certified Green. Achieving these verifications isn't just for a shiny plaque or good PR. It gives developers a very real competitive advantage. By proving projected energy and water savings to buyers, they can frequently justify a premium sales price.
Finally, Section 5, adapting to climate change.
100.
This number represents the 100-year flood zone, which is a land area subject to a 1% chance of flooding in any given year. As changing climate patterns actively reshape our geography, the number of lots sitting inside these zones becomes an absolutely critical metric. It directly impacts government-subsidized flood insurance, buyer mortgage rates, and ultimately, consumer demand.
Under the SASB framework, developers are literally required to report not just their raw lot numbers in these precarious zones, but they also have to provide a detailed description of their climate change risk exposure. They have to analyze their entire portfolio's vulnerability to extreme weather and detail their mitigation strategies. This could be anything from total floodplain avoidance to redesigning homes for physical resiliency to utilizing specialized insurance. All of this brings us to a really fascinating challenge. We've seen how these giant publicly listed entities operate on a massive scale. But as the environment shifts, literally redefining where we can safely and sustainably live, how will the home builders of tomorrow adapt their very foundations to survive? The data strongly suggests that developers integrating these sustainability metrics today are the only ones who will successfully build our communities tomorrow. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the data that builds our world.